Now, welcome to part 7 of my story about what happens if Ahsoka Tano never leaves the Jedi Order, and instead she and Fives begin to unravel the true purpose of the Clone Army, which is, of course, to carry out Order 66 and kill the Jedi. And very quickly before getting back to it, if you haven't seen the first 6 parts of this, I would highly recommend starting with part 1, and if you like it, working your way back to this part. Otherwise, this video or this part of the story really isn't going to make much sense. Links to all previous parts or the playlist will be in the comments and description below. As for those asking or wondering how many parts this will end up being, well, I can't give you an exact number, and that's because though I basically have the whole story and most of the major beats pretty much mapped out, sometimes things get sort of added or subtracted or changed along the way, and I never know exactly how this story will go till it's written. And since I write each part week to week for the actual videos, it's again hard to know just how long everything will take. That said, we are certainly heading towards the home stretch, and I wouldn't expect there to be too many more episodes, and I'd also call this particular episode the calm before the storm. Anyway, without further ado, let's get back to the story. We open on Coruscant at night in the Chancellor's office, where we see Palpatine standing at the large windows behind his desk, gazing out at the bustling city beyond, and on his face is the look of a man in deep thought contemplating a great many things, and among them, no doubt, is the apparent betrayal of Count Dooku, and that he's gone to speak with his hope-to-be-future apprentice, Anakin Skywalker. As we watch Palpatine, time fast-forwards, and nighttime on this part of the city planet soon becomes early morning, and all the while Palpatine just stands there, unmoving, thinking, and planning, as well as reaching out through and into the Force, commanding it to show him glimpses of the future as it has done so many times before, glimpses that have helped him with his brilliant machinations, that have led him to where he is now, on the precipice of the Sith ruling the galaxy once more. It's only when the doors to his office slide open, perhaps an hour or so after dawn, that Palpatine finally turns away from the window, the look on his face settled and confident once more, as he watches as roughly 10 Jedi led by Mace Windu, Ki-Adi-Mundi, and Yoda enter his office. They all approach the Chancellor's desk, some taking a seat once there, others standing behind them, and then Palpatine too takes a seat across the desk from all of them. It's Palpatine who then speaks first, and all he says is, "The time has come to press the attack and to end this war." The Jedi then all exchange some quick looks, clearly a bit confused. Before any of them can even ask a question as to what he's talking about, Palpatine hits a button on his desk, and a large holographic map of the galaxy is projected from it, with 3 highlighted locations on it. Palpatine then says, "Republic intelligence has learned the location of 3 new droid factories, all of which larger and potentially far more efficient than any the Separatists have constructed before." Palpatine briefly pauses and looks quickly at some of the Jedi, gauging their initial reactions before continuing. Thankfully, none of them are online yet, but they soon enough will be within the next 15 to 20 days, it's believed. And if that happens, there will simply be no way clone production can keep up. It will be only a matter of time before we lose this war, unless they're dealt with now. Mace Windu then leans back, a look on his face that is somehow both intrigued and skeptical at the same time. He then says, "And how exactly did they acquire this information? How can we be sure it's not a trap?" Palpatine responds, "I assure you the information is real and has already been confirmed." Palpatine then taps a few more buttons on his desk, and a detailed image of each of these 3 massive facilities on 3 separate planets can be seen. He then continues, "And what's even better news is that these sites are not highly protected, likely to keep our attention away from them and on the Outer Rim." Windu seems to think for a moment and then asks, "And what exactly are you suggesting?" Palpatine quickly answers, "An immediate, massive, and coordinated strike on all 3 targets simultaneously." Windu then rubs at his chin as if thinking about and considering it. He then says, "We'd have to pull so many forces from the Outer Rim that the Separatists would suspect something, plus they'd press their advantage there." Palpatine nods in agreement and says, "Which is why we would use our reserve forces and those here protecting Coruscant to take the facilities. All the while we strike as many Outer Rim targets as we can to keep them from having the chance to quickly reinforce the droid factories." Windu frowns and shakes his head a bit and says, "Not only would that leave Coruscant unprotected, but it would require us to place almost every last Jedi we have in the field to take command of the reserve clone forces and to carry out so many strikes in the Outer Rim." To that, Palpatine nods thoughtfully, as if it troubles him, but just might be necessary. Windu then turns to Yoda, who's seated next to him, and notices the ancient Jedi Master looks distracted, like he's hardly been listening, and so Windu says to him, "And what do you think, Master Yoda?" Yoda seems to snap out of it, and after a moment of confusion says, "Yes, troubling this news is. Risk much we must to destroy these facilities." Windu eyes Yoda for a long moment, not because of what he said, but because he's clearly worried about him, worried that he could be distracted during such a meeting of this magnitude, and after having recently said he was hearing the voices of the dead, of course. Windu then turns his attention back to Palpatine. "Perhaps we should wait to discuss this further until representatives from the Senate arrive," but Palpatine gives a polite smile and says, "I haven't called any here. I have little doubt they will agree with whatever course of action we decide upon." Windu looks slightly troubled by that, but says after a few long moments of quiet thought, "Unfortunately, I see no other way but what you suggest. We'll double our efforts in the Outer Rim to be a distraction as our reserve forces attack the facilities." Most of the other Jedi in the room nod in agreement, and Windu continues. "I believe it shouldn't take more than 10 days to muster and prepare the reserves, though I'm not sure if these new helmets will be ready by then. And if I recall right, there was something about a new advanced communication system being included with them, which sounds like something that might be useful for such an operation." Palpatine again nods thoughtfully and in agreement, unaware of just how important those helmets are to his plans. He then says, "Indeed, such an upgrade does sound useful. So let us hope fate is on our side, Master Jedi, that the helmets will be ready and distributed before the operation." We're then taken to Kamino into a medical lab where we see the Kaminoan Dr. Search hard at work and studying some sort of data on a terminal, when suddenly the door opens and, without being invited, in walks Fives. Dr. Search's head then pops up, and instead of looking and sounding annoyed by the interruption, he says with something like a smile on his face, "Ah, Fives, it is good to see you again." Fives seems a little surprised by the warm greeting, then says, "Something's going on. I've been ordered back to Coruscant immediately to help some Jedi I've never even heard of take command of a newly formed clone legion." "How curious," Dr. Search replies, tapping at his chin. But it's hard to tell if he's actually concerned by the news or not, and instead of inquiring about that either way, Fives asks, "How's Tup?" "I'm afraid there was some permanent damage to his brain from the chip malfunctioning, damage that likely would have ended up killing him if not for me." Dr. Search moves away from his terminal now, and starts to head towards something elsewhere in the room, and he says as he does, "He has been discharged from the Grand Army of the Republic and placed in a care facility for now, but hopefully much of the damage can be overcome and that it won't greatly affect the rest of his life." "The rest of his life?" Five echoes. "Funny, in all this time I've never once thought about after the war. What happens to me? What happens to all of us when this is over? What they'll do with us?" Dr. Search then chimes in, "You were designed not to think about that. Another feature of the chip was to keep you focused on what you were created for, and only that. Which means, when it's deactivated, your thoughts may change a bit. A risk we'll have to take, I'm afraid." Fives looks stunned and a little angry to hear him say that. "A risk we'll have to take?" he repeats. Dr. Search quickly responds, I only mean the clones still have to be the ones to win this war for the Republic. And when the chips are deactivated, that overwhelming urge and desire to fight will likely lessen to some degree, and you will begin to think about and worry about the self more, about the future you've never before considered." To that, Fives quickly says back, "Well, one thing I'm sure that won't change is our loyalty. All of us will keep fighting till the very end, to our end if need be. What my brothers and I have become in the face of this war goes beyond your programming." Dr. Search nods and says, "Yes, and what you and your brothers may one day become, once it's all over, will no longer be limited by that programming." That's when Dr. Search hands Fives a new helmet, one that he just went to retrieve, and one that has some vague similarities to the Phase 2 helmet, but looks distinctly different, the idea likely being to quickly see which clones have them, and thus to know which ones have had their chips deactivated. Fives then takes the helmet eagerly and is about to right away put it on, when he stops and asks, "What exactly is going to happen? Will I feel anything?" Dr. Search responds, "As soon as you put on the helmet, it will recognize your DNA and turn on, and when it does, it will activate the new communication system, which will immediately short out the chip. As for how it will feel, well, I don't believe it will hurt much at all. At most, it may cause a slight dizzy sensation, I suppose." Fives then looks at the helmet a bit skeptically for a second, then at Dr. Search and asks, "How can you not know? Didn't you have them tested first?" Dr. Search looks confused. "Tested? But I'm the one who designed them. Why would I need to test it?" Fives fires back, "To make sure it works. To make sure what happened to Tup's brain doesn't happen to mine and to all my brothers." Dr. Search then looks incredibly offended. "My goodness, never before have I been so insulted, and by a friend no less. Test my work as if I could be capable of anything less than perfection." Fives just shakes his head, takes a deep breath, and puts the helmet on. A moment later he says, I didn't feel much. Maybe something faint. Are you sure this thing worked?" Dr. Search folds his arms and says, "Would you like me to test it and see if it did?" Fives gives a bit of a shrug as if he doesn't want to say it, but does want to know for sure. Dr. Search tells him to take the helmet off, and then he scans Fives' head with some sort of handheld device, and then declares that the chip has indeed been deactivated. "I'll never doubt you again," Fives says with a smile. "You never should have in the first place," Dr. Search responds, but it's clear by the expression on his face he's already over it. Fives then stands up straight and at attention and salutes the doctor, and as he does, he says, "On behalf of myself and all my brothers, you have our thanks." For a moment, and just a moment, Dr. Search smiles, as if truly touched. He then starts to shoo Fives away as he hastily goes back to his work and says, Yes, now leave me be, clone. I have much work to do." Fives grins and chuckles a bit, and then does as requested and leaves the room. Which is when we're taken to the planet Scipio, where it's shortly after dawn, and we're in a room or apartment with Anakin Skywalker, who sits quietly with clearly a lot on his mind after having some sort of talk with Count Dooku the previous night. That's when we and he hears and sees some of that conversation in his head once more, and we hear the voice of Dooku saying, "You have been lied to, my boy, by everyone. The Jedi fear and mistrust you, while the Sith, my master, seeks only to use you." "You expect me to believe that?" Anakin fires back. "No," Dooku replies, "but I do expect you to believe yourself, to believe the Force, to feel, not think, to trust your instincts." These words seem to touch and trigger something deep within Anakin, and he begins to lower his saber a bit as emotion floods his face. He then mutters, almost more to himself than anything, That was the first lesson Qui-Gon ever taught me." Dooku nods, almost something like a faint smile on his face, as he says, "As it was my first lesson for him, as it was Yoda's first lesson for me." Anakin shakes his head as if trying to shake away the memory and to refocus. He raises his lightsaber once more and says, "What is it you want, Dooku?" That's when Dooku takes a long, deep breath and lets it out slowly before saying, "I saw it years ago how restless the Jedi were becoming in the absence of any true threats, how eager they were to work with the Republic to exert more and more control over the galaxy, how lost they were all becoming, even Master Yoda." Anakin snorts at that. "And so what? You decided to go to the dark side to help the Jedi refocus?" Dooku's brow raises just a bit and he nods his head. "In a way, yes. But I misjudged the sheer power of the dark side, how quickly it can consume even those who turn to it with good intent." Dooku then sighs and hangs his head a bit. "Nevertheless, it was my hope that this war would show the Jedi how far they had fallen, but I'm afraid it has only caused them to lose their way further. There is no hope for the Jedi Order. It will fall, and all that matters is who and what takes its place when it does." Dooku is quiet for a moment, letting Anakin process all that before finishing. "That is why my master must be stopped. Why it must be you and I who fill the void when this war is over." To all that, though, Anakin quickly asks, "And just who is your master?" "I believe you already know the answer to that. Chancellor Palpatine is the Sith Lord Darth Sidious." Anakin shuts his eyes and shakes his head. No, I won't believe you." "I'm not asking you to believe me, Anakin. I'm only asking you to believe yourself, and to do what you feel is right. The Jedi as they are cannot be saved. One way or another this war will end them, and one way or another this war will end soon. And when it does, you must be the one to restore the Jedi Order to its former glory, to see that it stands for another 1,000 generations and safeguards the galaxy from the darkest of threats. That has always been your one and only destiny." That's when Anakin snaps back to the present and sees that his wife, Padme Amidala, is standing before him. He was so lost in his thoughts that he never even heard her enter or walk right up to him. Were you up all night like this? She then asks, looking a bit sympathetic but not wanting to, like she still wants to be mad at him but finds that hard to do considering his current state, clearly under the impression she's the reason he couldn't sleep the previous night. Anakin looks up at her, then all around him as if he's only now noticing it's morning. He then says, yeah, I guess I was. Padme then says as she folds her arms and averts her eyes from him. We need to have a serious talk about all this, Anakin, about the future, about what it'll really be like once this war is over, if it ever ends. Anakin is then about to say something, but Padme interrupts. No, please, just let me say this first. She then sits down next to him, takes his hand, and continues. I love you, Anakin, I do, more than anything. But I don't love this life, all this hiding and secrecy. I thought I could handle it, but I don't know anymore. And though I have no place to ask you to leave the Jedi Order once this war is over, I know you've dreamed of being a Jedi since you were a boy. But I don't know if I can keep living like this. She then firmly shakes her head and says, No, I know I can't keep living like this. Anakin then, his face almost blank and expressionless, says, You're asking me to leave the Jedi Order once this war is over. Padme shakes her head but says, I have no right to ask that of you, I know, but I don't think this is the life either of us want, is it? Again, it looks like Anakin is about to say something, but Padme gets to her feet and then quickly says, Just think about all this, Anakin. I don't want any answer right now. I don't even need or want one till the war is over. And I'm probably a fool for not bringing this up till then, distracting you from everything that's going on now. Before she can say more, Anakin springs to his feet and just wraps his arms around her and hugs her, and Padme falls silent and the two just embrace for a long while. And he's holding Padme so close that she cannot see all the tears streaming down his face. That's when suddenly the communicator on Anakin's wrist lets out a quick series of beeps. Anakin then pulls away from Padme and immediately turns around to hide his tear-streaked face and looks at his communicator. What is it? Padme asks, looking a bit concerned. It's the code to report in immediately or to return to the temple if possible. Anakin frowns and then concludes, Something big must be happening or about to happen. What could it be? Padme asks. If it involved the Senate, I'd likely already know about it. Anakin then says, Whatever it is, I should check in and head back to Coruscant, I guess. Padme seems surprised. What about Rush Clovis? Anakin frowns. Looks like I'll just have to trust you with him. But Anakin shakes his head after saying that and turns around, showing her his tear-streaked face, and now seeing hers. I do trust you, Padme, and I'm going to need you to trust me now more than ever. Padme immediately responds okay, but then says, You're scaring me a bit, Anakin. Don't be scared, he replies. Everything is going to be okay, I promise. The two embrace once more, and then Anakin simply leaves. And once he's out in the hall, the communicator on his wrist goes off once again, letting out that same series of beeps. All Anakin does, though, is remove it, crush it with his mechanical hand, and carelessly discard the pieces. Soon enough, he makes his way out into the cold to a landing pad where he sees not only Dooku's solar sailor ship, but Count Dooku himself standing at the base of the ramp up into it. Anakin then walks up to him and all he does is nod his head once. Dooku then places a hand on Anakin's shoulder and all he says is, You have made the right decision. Qui-Gon Jinn would be proud of you, my boy. Anakin then walks up the ramp and into the ship, which is when Count Dooku simply smiles from ear to ear, and it's hard to know exactly what that smile means. We're then taken to Dathomir, where we see Maul and Ahsoka, who are both still battered and bruised after essentially having a landslide fall on them, and they are slowly walking up the ramp of Maul's Mandalorian ship, and trailing behind them are both Marin and Ahsoka's astromech droid R7. Once in the ship then, Ahsoka asks, And so what exactly is the plan now? Maul seems a little confused by the question and then makes a fist and says, Together we will stop Sidious. Ahsoka frowns. That's it? That's all you've got? Anakin's plans are better thought out than that one. Maul snarls a bit and then walks away and heads up towards the cockpit. Ahsoka is about to say something else when her wrist communicator goes off and goes through a series of beeps. Maul stops in his tracks and asks, What's that? Ahsoka seems hesitant to say at first, like she doesn't want to give away some sort of Jedi secret, but then says anyway, That's the code calling all Jedi back to the temple, or to check in if unable to return. Maul gives a look asking what that could possibly mean, and Ahsoka shrugs. It's never been used before, not in my time anyway. This could only mean something big is about to happen, something we need to know about. Maul again snarls a bit and says, I thought your master told all your other Jedi friends that you were dead. Ahsoka frowns. He said he told Palpatine, which means, yeah, the Jedi probably know, or they think they know, so maybe it's time to correct that thinking. Either way, we have to know what this means. Besides, it might help us form an actual plan. Maul seems to consider it, then makes a whatever gesture with his hand and says, Very well, to Coruscant then. And that is where this part ends. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you thought of this part of the story and what you think might happen next. Either way, do leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.